Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a moment for people to tune in and we'll get started here shortly. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ren Brownell. I'm the Public Information Officer with the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, the entity tasked with overseeing the removal and restoration of the Klamath Hydroelectric Dam Removal Project. Today, we're here to provide an update as to how the drawdown period went and where we're going with restoration. If you guys have any questions along the way, we're going to start off with the presentation. Feel free to ask those in the chat and I'll pose them to Mark and Dave once the presentation is complete. And with that, I'll have Mark and Dave introduce themselves and we'll get started.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Bransom, the Chief Executive Officer of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation.
And good morning, I'm Dave Kaufman, Resource Environmental Solutions Director of Northern California, Southern Oregon Operations and Program Manager for Restoration on the Lower Klamath Project.
So we've got a presentation to give you all an update on where things are. This is a very exciting time for the Klamath River Renewal Project, and we're pleased to have the opportunity to brief you all. So thanks again for joining. Just as a quick reminder, these are the 4 dams that make up the Lower Klamath Hydroelectric Project, starting in the lower left corner at the top of the river system, the J.C. Boyle Dam, coming down river, then Copco number 1, the former Copco number 2 dam, and the lowest of the 4 dams on the river, Iron Gate. So for context, here is a map of the Klamath River watershed. You can see the 4 dams connected in the middle by the purple line there. Important to note that these 4 dams basically bisect the Klamath watershed into a lower and an upper region, and of course have blocked the migration of fish and other species up and down the river as a result of this bisection. So last year, after taking ownership of the 4 dams and the appurtenant facilities at the end of 2022, we spent 2023 making preparations for the drawdown and dam removal. One of the things that we accomplished during the summer and early fall of 2023 was the removal of the Copco number 2 dam. Copco number 2 was a small dam. It did not create a reservoir. It was a small diversion dam that diverted water released from Copco number 1 just up above it, diverted that water from the river into a tunnel and down to a powerhouse. The location of Copco number 2 would have created unnecessary interference with the drawdown of Copco number 1. So we took advantage of time and resources we had available last year to fully remove the Copco number 2 dam. And there you see a picture of the former dam up above and the bottom picture following dam removal and restoration of the channel. So just for some definitional context, we refer to the initial drawdown phase, which we have just completed, as the opening of low-level outlets at the dams and the draining of the reservoirs to get down to a free-flowing river condition. That is the draining out of all of the stored water behind the reservoirs. We refer to final drawdown as the period that comes next, and that is while we have any spring runoff, any spring freshet, and any flood flows have completely passed through the system, and we get back down to a river base flow condition that meets the biological opinion flow conditions for minimum flows. And that is the point then at which we will be prepared to initiate dam removal. Once we're sure that the river has come back down to those minimum flows and we have passed the period of any major flood risk, then we'll get started on removal of the dams. So here's a timeline just showing the various phases of the work. So at the end of last year, we began the operational drawdown, and we've just completed the initial drawdown phase, as you see there in blue, in the January and early February timeframe, when we brought these reservoirs completely down. We'll talk a little bit more about the rest of this timeline as we wrap up the presentation. Want to talk a little bit about the sediment that has accumulated behind these dams. Of course, the dams have been blocking the river for over 100 years. And during that period of time, the presence of those dams has cut off a really important process in a healthy river system, and that is the transport of sediment. We've estimated that there were somewhere on the order of about 17 to 20 million cubic yards of sediment that had accumulated behind the dams over the last century. And of that 17 to 20 million cubic yards, we had projected that somewhere on the order of about a third of that sediment, or about 5 to 7 million cubic yards, would be expected to be mobilized during the drawdown and to travel downstream through the river system, and much of that material out to the Pacific Ocean, thereby restoring a really critical function in a healthy river system. Now, for context, on average, the Klamath River moves roughly 5 to 7 million cubic yards of sediment on an annual basis. And so we're introducing essentially the equivalent of 1 year's worth of sediment. Now, understood that we are introducing that volume of sediment in a shorter period of time. But for context, it is being done during the winter months when we have, some expectation that we've got the advantage of flow conditions and the least biological impacts. This was the period of the year that tribes and fisheries agencies made the decision that would be the best time of the year. We don't have adult salmon in the river system. Most of the juveniles are up in the tributaries and have not yet started their outmigration to the ocean. And so this was really the optimal time to initiate the drawdown and to mobilize this amount of sediment and send it down the river. Just want to talk a little bit about the drawdown process. This is a picture of Iron Gate Dam and the initiation of drawdown that took place in early January at Iron Gate. We were able to take advantage of existing infrastructure, and you can see dead center in the photo the existing low-level outlet tunnel that we opened up to initiate the drawdown. This is a picture of Iron Gate Reservoir and the Klamath River after drawdown. A recent picture, I think just earlier this week or last week. What you see is the Klamath River flowing from the top of the picture toward the bottom. And on the left side, this is Jenny Creek flowing into the Klamath River, the reconnection at its historic point with the Klamath River. Jenny Creek is a really important tributary. These tributary streams in the hydroelectric reach are bringing clean, cold water into the river that will serve really important benefits with regard to our restoration objectives for the river. The Iron Gate Reservoir drained right on schedule, and we came back down to river conditions right up against Iron Gate Dam on Saturday of this last weekend. Here's a drone image of the initiation of drawdown at J.C. Boyle. We blasted out a concrete wall in a culvert under the spillway section of the dam there to initiate the drawdown. And then we have a picture of the J.C. Boyle drawdown sometime later. J.C. Boyle was a much smaller reservoir relative to the size of Copco number 1 reservoir and Iron Gate, and so it drew down over the period of roughly 17 hours. This is a picture of the Copco number 1 dam. What you see in the middle of the picture there is a steel pipe that we put on an extension of a new tunnel that we drilled and blasted through the base of Copco number 1 dam. On the right-hand side of the photo, you see the historic diversion tunnel. We made a decision not to utilize the historic diversion tunnel for the drawdown simply because we did not have assurance that the tunnel was in adequate structural condition and hydraulic condition in order to handle all the flows for the purposes of draining out the reservoir. So we made the decision to go in and create a new tunnel through the base of the dam and utilize that for the purposes of the drawdown. This next picture is the moment of the blast of the concrete plug that was at the upstream face of the dam inside the new tunnel that we created. It was really inspiring to watch this blast, and moments after the blast to see the water and sediment begin to come out from behind the dam. And over the course of a week, we watched the process of the reservoir completely draining out and getting back down to a river condition, flowing in its natural historic channel, and very inspiring to watch the river reconnect after a full century of being blocked by this dam. This is a picture of Copco Reservoir, again, the Klamath River, finding its historic channel and winding its way down through the old reservoir. A lot of sediment mobilized and moved through the system exactly according to our plans and our projections. And so we're very pleased with the progress that has been made on the drawdown. I want to talk just a little bit about the strategy at Copco Reservoir. In the weeks leading up, as I showed on the timeline, we did lower the reservoir to the minimum operating pool. The purpose of doing that really was to reduce the amount of water that we needed to release, just to shorten up the time. But more importantly, we really wanted to bring the reservoir down to allow the hillsides along the reservoir rim to begin to drain out. We were aware that we had some weak geologic conditions that could have created some slope instability. And so by pre-draining these hillsides, we actually enhanced the reservoir rim stability and reduced the risk of any foundation movement or settling of the soils and the geologic material that could have impacted any of the surrounding homes. In addition to bringing the reservoir down in advance of drawdown, we wanted to further manage this by controlling the drawdown rate. And so we accomplished that primarily by bringing water in from upriver. During the drawdown, what we refer to as the operational drawdown to minimum pool, we agreed with the Bureau of Reclamation that we would release water from Copco and Iron Gate that would offset water that would otherwise have been released from Upper Klamath Lake to allow the Bureau of Reclamation to meet their regulatory requirements to allow a certain amount of water to flow downriver below Iron Gate Dam. And so in exchange for releasing water that the Bureau of Reclamation could hold on to, we released that water from Upper Klamath Lake and Keno Dam during the initiation of drawdown at Copco. And what that basically did was brought a more equal balance of the water flowing out of Copco and the water coming in that allowed us to control that drawdown rate and further reduce the risk to the public of having any instability there. And then, of course, we had a very successful full opening of the tunnel to evacuate the sediment and the stored water from behind Copco Dam. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Kaufman to talk a little bit about some of the restoration activities that are underway, and then look forward to turning to some questions. Dave?
Thank you, Mark. And first to the group, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm struggling through a cold, so if I have to pause and turn away, that's why. I want to start, we're going to talk restoration, but a reminder that the project has a lot of what we call resource protection measures in place. And RES is responsible for a number of those, one of which is water quality and sediment monitoring. We have been doing project-related water quality monitoring since 2022. Last year, 2023, was the start of the first year of the required water quality monitoring associated with the California 401 water quality certification. 9 or 10, depending on the analyte water quality stations being monitored starting upstream of J.C. Bull Reservoir on down to the mouth of the Klamath River for either real-time continuous monitoring, water quality grab samples, sediment grab samples, etc., building on decade-plus worth of work done by the Department of the Interior in prior versions of this project, coordinated through the EPA, that back to kind of the sediment discussion Mark started earlier, really looked into the composition of the sediment, the quality of the sediment, and then, of course, expected potential impacts, short-term impacts on water quality downstream of the reservoirs coming from initiating the drawdown. So that activity is ongoing. We have crews out collecting water samples, monitoring our real-time, or taking care of our real-time water quality data sondes. That work is covered collaboratively between the KRRC tribe and the U.S. Geological Survey. Water quality samples being collected physically every 2 weeks for some analytes, monthly for others. Testing being done, reporting made on a regular basis, and really working to keep an eye on the short-term impacts and then eventual improvements in water quality that we see resulting from this initialization of drawdown and dam removal on through the restoration phase of the project. With that, getting into some more of the nitty-gritty on restoration, we can honestly say now that restoration truly is underway. So we've had revegetation crews out on reservoir sediments since the 15th of January. So starting with a day or a few days after the drawdown of Iron Gate was initiated, we had crews on the ground starting to plant seeds that we've been collecting and propagating since 2018. So as kind of a reminder, we've collected 13 to 15 million seeds by hand, primarily through our partnership with the Yurok tribe. Those seeds have been then propagated through yield increase grows at nurseries up and down the West Coast, resulting in a seed source of 17 to 20 billion seeds that have been started to be mixed into 5+ mixes that are kind of laid down dependent on the conditions that are encountered on the reservoir bottoms following drawdown. These seeds are being spread, and we'll show you here in another slide or two is the results of some of that initial work. We've got 98 different species of plants contained within these seed mixes right now. Species that are, one, can be collected. Some are more difficult than others, can be propagated, and then, of course, a focus on culturally significant species. One of of course, the bigger picture that really draws your eye on this slide is the photo of the lupin. And well, not only is lupin pretty, but it's also a nitrogen fixer. And we recognized pretty early on that while these sediments, these reservoir sediments, contain a decent amount of nutrients, they don't necessarily contain those nutrients in the right chemical format. And so lupin is one of the species that allows the nitrogen to be kind of fixed through the growth process of the plant, and then become available other plants that grow in and around the lupin. One point I'll make here is that while the majority of our planting and seeding initially is being done by hand as conditions allow, we will be mobilizing a helicopter within the next few weeks to begin laying down seed in some of the areas where we can't get to physically on foot because of challenging mud conditions. And so look for that to start happening. We intend to get up and running, as I mentioned, within a few weeks and be wrapped up with that seeding effort by mid-March. Now here's one of the more exciting photos. These are germinated plants from our revegetation effort. Now, I am a geologist, I am not a botanist, and even our botanists are having trouble identifying the individual species of these plants at this young state. But we can suffice it to say, we're already starting to see the fruits of our years of labor. And so with the opportunity I have, I want to give a huge shout out of thanks to the Yurok tribe and the KRRC tribe and the participants on this first seed collection effort that turned into a yield increase effort done under contract with these different grow nurseries, and now on the ground, and we're starting to see the response of the landscape to all the hard work and preparation that's gone into it. As a reminder, just kind of that was certainly a macro scale. this is a much broader scale. As the reservoir sediment has become exposed, what we're seeing is the Klamath River in its location where we expected it to be. The river itself is going to continue to chew on deposited reservoir sediments for some time, and we will be seeding right up to the water's edge this year to get vegetation established to start to promote long-term stability of that remaining reservoir sediment that isn't flushed out with drawdown and then with rains through the spring.
So let's talk just briefly about what comes next. So you can see from the timeline here, and I mentioned previously that we're going to be waiting for the spring runoff to pass through the system before we get started with dam removal. But we do have a number of activities that we will be undertaking in the interim while we're watching the weather forecast and waiting for that spring freshet to come through. Namely, we're going to get started on the decommissioning of the powerhouses and a variety of other tasks that need to be completed and can be completed while we're anticipating getting started on dam removal in the fall. So I mentioned and showed you a picture of that historic diversion tunnel at Kopko. We're in the process of getting ready to reopen that historic tunnel so that we can utilize it to direct the river through the diversion tunnel and create a dry working condition for the removal of Kopko number 1 dam, and basically repeat the process that was utilized during the initial construction of Kopko Dam to use that tunnel to create a safe dry working condition for the dam construction work. So once we get to the spring and see the river back down to base flow condition, we'll get out and initiate the removal of J.C. Boyle, Kopko number 1, and Iron Gate more or less simultaneously. And our objective is to have completed dam removal and have restored a free-flowing river condition in the September, early October timeframe. And depending on what we see for the remainder of winter and the spring, we might even get a jump start on that and wrap that up a little bit earlier. But our current schedule has us going out into the September timeframe, and our goal is to be completely out of the river in time for the fall run and to have reopened some of the upper tributaries and main stem for fish that may be coming through. So with that, let me see what comes next.
That is actually wraps up our presentation. So please feel free, if you have any questions, to throw them into the chat. I do have one. Oh, we have a couple coming through. So Deb Kroll asks, opponents of the dam removal say that the invasives are going to overcome the native plants. Some also say that they're concerned about where the acorns were sourced. I imagine that around sudden oak death. Could you perhaps address that, Dave?
I can. The approach that we've taken, recognizing that the entire landscape of the Upper Klamath Basin is chock full of invasive exotic vegetation, is one of pre-treatment of the surrounding landscape, then establishment of a native vegetation cover within the reservoir footprint, an early detection and response program for IEV, and then a longer-term monitoring and maintenance program. So going back to the beginning feature, which was that pre-treatment prior to drawdown for 3 years, we've had crews out treating buffers around Iron Gate and J.C. Boyle reservoirs for invasive species, and that's consisted primarily of mowing on a very limited basis, some spot herbicide application to really limit the seed source for those exotic invasive species in the immediate vicinity of the reservoir to hopefully limit their transport downhill into the reservoir sediments. When I talked earlier about the revegetation process, we focused our efforts on that reservoir rim. And so we've got kind of a little rocky wake area along the reservoir rim and then down into the reservoir sediments, where we recognize, because of the distribution or disbursement processes associated with these invasive species, they're mostly locally below downhill type seed distribution. And so once you take up the available planting or the available soil real estate with native species, the invasive species aren't able to get a foothold. Now, we also spend an exorbitant amount of time on our restoration sites walking around, observing things. And so if and when, I'll say, we identify areas where invasive species are maybe starting to get a foothold, we don't wait to develop a large-scale program to address those issues. We attack it head on. We'll get out there if we have to on our hands and knees and pull these species out before they go to seed, before they're able to cause further issues. And then that process continues for a number of years while we have our restoration obligations on the project. So that kind of covers invasive species. On the question about sudden oak death, recognizing the concern and, of course, the very real issue, we only sourced acorns from areas that had not been experiencing or have traditionally experienced sudden oak death.
I'm off of mute.
Excuse me. Yeah, I was muted. Thank you for that, Dave. From McKenna Marks with KDRV. Mark, during Siskiy's Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday, community members shared their concerns and expressed doubt in the success of this project. Is KRRC still confident that the project will accomplish its goal of restoring the Klamath River and bringing back salmon?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's really important to note that the Klamath River is one of the most studied watersheds anywhere in the world. And, specifically, there has been an awful lot of work done to better understand how the river, is likely to recover. We did a significant number of studies and planning, for the drawdown and dam removal. And, I'm really pleased to report that all of the observations and all of the conditions that we're seeing today, are within the boundaries of what we had anticipated. Some on the lower end, some on the higher end, but everything is going according to the conditions that we had anticipated, given all of the work that we've done. What we're seeing are temporary conditions. These sediments are going to dry out. The vegetation is going to continue to come in. And the water quality is going to improve as the sediment continues to flush out. So we expect to have recovery of these important water quality parameters that we're monitoring that are having these impacts. And let's just be clear that these are temporary impacts that are within the range of things that we had anticipated, things that we had communicated, things that our regulators affirmed in the permits that they issued for us. And so I think we just need to take a long view of the processes. And look, we are coming out of over a century of accumulated impacts from the presence of these dams and impacts to the rivers. So let's take a long view and give the river some time. Previous dam removal projects and other landscape scale restoration projects give us lots to be optimistic about, that Mother Nature is going to be on the recovery and rebalance here. It's just not going to happen overnight, and we just need to take a little time and continue to give things a little light nudge where we can do so. As Dave said, job one is to stabilize these sediments in place. That's going to go a long way to help us improve water quality and habitat conditions consistent with the goals for the project.
Muted myself again. So just since we're running out of time, I'm going to lump a couple of these questions. We have quite a few about the death, particularly about the non-native fish that we saw after initiating drawdown. So Dave, maybe could you touch on why we saw the death of these non-native species and why there wasn't more of a relocation effort performed on these species specifically?
Sure. Thanks, Ren. And I think you started the response adequately by pointing out that these are non-native species that we're seeing that have died as a result of the drawdown and changing conditions. The species that we're primarily talking about are yellow perch, crappie, black bass, a handful of other warm water lake species that were introduced to these impoundments for fishing. There was not an effort to capture and relocate them because they are a non-native invasive species in a river condition. and shouldn't have been here in the first place. And so the resource agencies elected to not request or require a capture relocation effort. As to why we're seeing the mortality that we are, that goes back to the types of species that they are. They're used to call it either calm or slightly flowing conditions, slightly warmer water. And it was always expected that these non-native lake species would not be able to persist in a river environment. There are pockets of those species along the Klamath River and some off-channel habitat downstream. And recognizing that they've been washing out of these lakes for decades and have established populations down there, those populations are fully occupied, or those habitats are fully occupied to the point where it was always expected and always conveyed that those species would be most likely flushed out during drawdown and perish or not make it out of the reservoirs in the first place.
So for any questions that we weren't able to get to during this short period of time, feel free to send those my way. I put my email in the chat, so grab that there. It's ren, R-E-N, @klamathrenewal.org. And unfortunately with that, we are out of time. But like I said, feel free to reach out with any additional questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.